The photograph was different. It had been there, on the mantelpiece, for as long as I could remember, a faded sepia-toned image of my family. My parents, their smiles stiff and unnatural, flanking a much younger me, beaming with a naive, childish joy. But now, the child was gone. In the place of my younger self, there was only a blur, a patch of swirling gray that seemed to absorb all light. It wasn't a simple smudge or a defect in the print. It was as if the image of the child had been deliberately erased, removed from the photograph, and from the timeline it represented. The rest of the picture remained unchanged, the stiff smiles, the old furniture, the patterned wallpaper, all there, mocking the emptiness where I should have been. I reached for it, my fingers brushing the cool, smooth glass of the frame, but I recoiled, a strange unease settling in the pit of my stomach. The photograph was wrong, fundamentally wrong, and the wrongness felt like a silent scream that I stared at the photograph, the blurred patch where my younger self should be seeming to pulsate subtly. I had to be mistaken, surely. Photos don't just change like that. I looked around the living room, trying to find something, anything that felt familiar, something that could ground me in a tangible reality. The same old, floral couch, the dusty bookshelves crammed with forgotten titles, the grandfather clock ticking away with its slow, monotonous rhythm. But everything felt off, like a stage set that had been rearranged slightly out of place, just enough to make me feel uneasy. I moved to the bookshelf, running my fingers along the spines of the books, searching for a title that would spark a memory, a connection to the past. But the titles blurred before my eyes, the words seeming to shift and change, becoming nonsensical strings of letters. I picked one at random, the cover feeling brittle and papery under my touch. The title read, The Unwritten Chapters. I opened it to a random page, but the words on the page swam before my eyes, forming grotesque symbols that felt somehow familiar, yet alien, a language I couldn't understand, but knew I should. My hands began to tremble, a cold dread seeping into my bones. It wasn't just the photograph. Something was deeply wrong with the world around me. I closed the book, the grotesque symbols burning behind my eyelids. I needed to get out of the house, to feel the fresh air, to see something that hadn't been twisted into a mockery of itself. I grabbed my coat from the hallway closet, the fabric feeling coarse and unfamiliar against my skin, as if it belonged to someone else. I opened the front door, but the world outside wasn't the same as I remembered. The sky was a flat, gray expanse, no clouds, no sun, just a featureless void. The houses across the street seemed to be sinking into the ground, their outlines blurred and indistinct, as if they were fading from existence. The trees in my front yard were gnarled and twisted, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, and the grass had turned a sickly shade of pale yellow, the color of decay. It felt like I had stepped into a photograph that had been left out in the rain, the details fading and running, the colors drained of all life. I took a step forward, my feet crunching on the dead grass, but a feeling of dread, cold and heavy, settled upon me, pulling me back. This wasn't just a change in perception, this was a fundamental shift in reality. I was completely alone, adrift in a world that had turned against me. I retreated back into the house, slamming the doors shut, as if I could somehow lock out the distorted reality outside. But the unease had followed me in, a cold, creeping presence that settled in the corners of my mind. I moved through the house, each room feeling both familiar and alien, like a place I had once known but could no longer recognize. I caught my reflection in the mirror in the hallway. My face looked pale and gaunt, my eyes wide and dark, reflecting the same void that had consumed the sky. I ran a hand through my hair, which felt thin and lifeless, like dried grass. I wasn't myself anymore, or perhaps I never had been. The thought, unbidden, slithered into my mind. The house felt like it was watching me, the walls listening, the shadows whispering secrets I didn't want to know. It was a silent, insidious presence that had been there all along, waiting to reveal itself. I started to question everything, my memories, my perceptions, even my own identity. Was any of this real? Or was it all some elaborate delusion, a nightmare from which I would never wake? The air grew heavy, the silence broken only by the slow, deliberate tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the living room, a relentless rhythm that seemed to be counting down to something terrible that I tried to distract myself, to find something, anything, that would anchor me in reality. I went to the kitchen, hoping to make a cup of tea, the familiar routine offering a small comfort. But as I reached for the kettle, a strange scent filled the room, a cloying sweetness that was both enticing and repellent, like rotting fruit mixed with something metallic. It was coming from everywhere, emanating from the walls, the countertops, even the water in the sink. The smell made my stomach churn, a wave of nausea washing over me. I turned on the tap, hoping to wash the scent away, but the water that came out was thick and murky, a viscous fluid that looked more like blood than water. I quickly turned it off, the metallic scent now clinging to my hands. The kitchen felt like it was closing in on me, the walls pulsing with an unseen rhythm. I stumbled backward, bumping into the table, sending a glass tumbler crashing to the floor. The glass shattered into 1,000 pieces, but the sound it made was wrong, a dull thud that seemed to resonate deep within my bones, not a sharp crack that I expected. Nothing was right, nothing was real. My senses were betraying me, and I was falling deeper into an abyss of confusion and dread that I had to understand what was happening. I had to find some explanation for the distorted reality that had enveloped me. I went to the attic, the place where my family kept old documents, hoping to find some clue, some explanation for the altered photograph, the distorted world, the unsettling sensations. The attic was dark and dusty, the air heavy with the smell of decay and forgotten memories. Cobwebs hung from the rafters like macabre decorations, and the floorboards groaned under my weight. I moved slowly, my hands brushing against dusty boxes and forgotten furniture, searching for something, anything, that would make sense. I found a stack of old family albums, their covers faded and worn, and pulled one out at random. I opened it, hoping to find more photographs, more clues. But the photos inside were all blank, empty squares of white paper, each one like a missing piece of my past. It was as if my entire family history had been erased, leaving behind only the emptiness. The metallic scent from the kitchen was stronger here, and I could hear a faint humming sound emanating from the walls, a low, resonant vibration that seemed to burrow its way into my skull. I closed the album, my hand shaking, a cold dread settling in the pit of my stomach. I wasn't finding answers. I was finding more questions, each more terrifying than the last. I stumbled back down the attic stairs, feeling disoriented and confused. The house seemed to be shifting around me, the hallways twisting and turning, as if I were walking through a labyrinth. I couldn't remember how long I had been in the attic, or even what time it was. The grandfather clock in the living room was still ticking, its slow, deliberate rhythm a constant reminder that time was passing, but it seemed to be moving in an unnatural pace, either too fast or too slow. I couldn't tell which. I looked out the window again, but the sky was still a flat, gray expanse, and the houses across the street were even more blurred and distorted than before. It felt like I was trapped in a perpetual twilight, a moment stretched out to eternity. The metallic scent was getting stronger, and the humming from the walls was now a constant, oppressive drone that seemed to be vibrating deep within my bones. I looked at my hands, and they seemed to be blurring, the edges indistinct, as if they were beginning to fade from existence. I tried to focus on something, anything, that felt real, but everything was shifting and changing, making it impossible to find any sense of stability. The boundaries of my own reality were blurring, and I was falling deeper into a state of disorientation and dread that I wasn't just experiencing random distortions. I was starting to suspect that something or someone was deliberately manipulating my reality, twisting it into this grotesque mockery of itself. The changes weren't random. They were targeted, designed to confuse and disorient me, to push me to the brink of madness. The way the photographs had changed, the way the books had become nonsensical, the way my senses were failing me. It all felt intentional, like a carefully orchestrated performance, and I was the unwilling participant. I moved to the living room window, staring out at the distorted world outside. I felt like I was being watched, not just by the house, but by something beyond the house, something that was controlling the twisted landscape, the flat gray sky, the sinking buildings. It was a malevolent intelligence, a cold, calculating force that was observing my every move, feeding on my fear and confusion. The humming from the walls seemed to grow louder. The metallic scent was almost unbearable, and a strange, whispering sound had joined the chorus of sensory distortions. It felt like the house itself was laughing at me, a silent, mocking laughter that was more terrifying than any scream. I was no longer just alone. I was being hunted. The whispers were getting louder, more distinct. They were no longer just sounds. They were forming words, phrases that seemed to be directed at me, taunting me, reminding me of things I didn't want to remember. You are not real. You are a copy. You belong here. They echoed in my head, intertwining with the humming from the walls, creating a cacophony of sound that threatened to shatter my sanity. Then came the visions, quick flashes of images that seemed to flicker at the edge of my consciousness. Twisted faces, shadowy figures lurking in dark corners, a landscape of decay and despair that stretched out to infinity. I would blink, and they would be gone, leaving me breathless and disoriented, wondering if they had been real or just figments of my imagination. But they were becoming more frequent, more vivid, more terrifying. The line between what was real and what was a hallucination was blurring, and I was losing my grip on reality. I tried to block out the visions, to focus on something tangible, but they were relentless, invading my thoughts, tormenting me with their unsettling imagery. The metallic scent was overpowering, and I could feel the house itself pulsating with a dark, malevolent energy. I was becoming a prisoner in my own mind, trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape, that I had to fight back. I couldn't let this malevolent force, whatever it was, completely consume me. I had to find some way to regain control, to assert my own will against the distortions, the whispers, the visions. I decided to focus on the mundane, to perform the simple actions that once grounded me in reality. I went to the kitchen and tried to make a meal, but the food was all wrong. The bread was stale and hard as rock. The vegetables were wilted and discolored, and the meat had a strange, unnatural texture, like rubber. The scent of decay and metal permeated everything, making it impossible to eat. I threw the food into the trash, but even that felt wrong, a muffled thud as it landed, as if the trash can itself was distorted. I tried to clean the dishes, but the water was still murky and thick, and the dishes felt strangely heavy in my hands. I tried to make a list, to write down what I was experiencing, but the pen wouldn't work, and the paper was blank. Every attempt to assert control, to ground myself in reality, was met with resistance, as if the house itself was mocking my efforts. The whispers grew louder, taunting me with my own powerlessness, and the visions became more frequent and intense, filling my mind with images of horror and despair. I was losing the battle, and I knew it. The visions were no longer just flashes of images. They were becoming like memories, vivid and detailed, but they weren't my memories. I saw myself, or someone who looked like me, living in a different house, in a different time, leading a different life. I saw a younger version of myself, happy and carefree, playing in a field of sunflowers, a scene that was both beautiful and heartbreaking because it felt so distant and unattainable. I saw a future version of myself, gaunt and hollow-eyed, walking through a wasteland, a desolate landscape that seemed to mirror the emptiness in my soul. And in every vision, I saw the shadowy figure, lurking in the background, watching me, always watching me. It felt like my own identity was fracturing, splitting into multiple cells that existed in different realities, each one connected to the others, but none of them whole. The whispers were now calling me by different names, each one jarring, each one feeling both familiar and alien. I was no longer sure who I was or what my purpose was. The metallic scent was overpowering, and the humming from the walls was almost unbearable, a constant drone that seemed to be tearing me apart from the inside out. I was losing my grip on my own self, and I was becoming nothing more than a collection of fragmented memories and distorted visions. The house was no longer a static structure. It was becoming a reflection of my own fractured mind. The walls were shifting and changing, twisting into grotesque shapes, the doors moving from one place to another, the windows opening onto scenes that were both familiar and alien. I would walk down a hallway and find myself in a room I had never seen before, a room filled with strange furniture, grotesque decorations, and an oppressive silence that seemed to suffocate me. The rooms themselves were becoming fragmented, splitting into multiple versions of themselves, some bright and cheerful, some dark and foreboding, all of them equally unsettling. It was like the house was mirroring my own fractured identity, a collection of different realities, each one vying for dominance, creating a chaotic and unpredictable landscape that defied all logic. The whispering voices grew louder, and the visions became more intense, filling every corner of the house with their terrifying presence. I tried to escape, to find a way out, but the doors led to nowhere. The windows opened onto endless vistas of despair, and the hallways twisted and turned, leading me back to the same unsettling rooms, as if the house itself was a labyrinth designed to trap me forever. I was no longer just a prisoner in my own mind. I was a prisoner in a house that had become a living nightmare. The whispers stopped, replaced by a single voice, clear and distinct, yet devoid of any warmth or empathy. It was the same voice that had been calling me by different names, the voice that had been taunting me, reminding me of my powerlessness. But now, the voice was speaking directly to me, addressing me by my real name, the name I had almost forgotten. "You cannot escape us," the voice said, its tone cold and condescending. "You are ours now. You belong to us. You will become a part of the whole." The voice seemed to emanate from everywhere, from the walls, from the floor, from the very air I was breathing. It felt like the house itself was speaking, using the voice as its mouthpiece, a tool to communicate its intentions. I tried to resist, to scream, to tell the voice that I would not submit, but no sound would come. I was a puppet, dancing to the strings of a malevolent force that had finally revealed its true nature. I could feel my mind unraveling, my will weakening, as the voice continued to speak, filling my thoughts with its dark and twisted agenda. The metallic scent was almost overwhelming. The humming from the walls was a constant, oppressive drone, and the visions were now a continuous barrage of terrifying imagery, all converging on my broken and fragmented consciousness. The voice kept telling me that I had to remember, that my memories were the key to understanding what was happening, to finding my place in this twisted reality. But the memories that were flooding my mind weren't my own. They were fragmented pieces of someone else's life, someone else's history, a history that was both familiar and alien, like a half-forgotten dream. I saw myself, or someone who looked like me, standing in a dark room, surrounded by strange symbols, chanting in an unknown language. I saw a ritual, a sacrifice, a dark and twisted ceremony that seemed to be unfolding in the very house I was trapped in. And in every memory, I saw the shadowy figure, always present, always watching, always guiding the events. The more I tried to remember, the more disturbing the visions became, the more fragmented my sense of self became. It felt like I was being forced to relive someone else's nightmare, a nightmare that was somehow connected to my own. I tried to resist, to block out the visions, but the voice wouldn't let me, forcing me to confront the disturbing details, the horrifying truth that was hidden within the depths of my own mind. The metallic scent was now like a physical presence, and the humming from the walls was a deafening roar, threatening to shatter my consciousness. As the memories became more vivid, the physical changes started to accelerate. It was no longer just my mind that was fracturing. My body was beginning to shift and change, morphing into something unnatural, something grotesque. My skin felt thin and papery, my bones felt brittle and hollow, and my limbs were lengthening and distorting, taking on strange, unnatural angles. I looked at my hands, and saw that my fingers were growing longer, thinner, the nails turning into sharp claw-like talons. My face was becoming elongated, my eyes were sinking deeper into their sockets, and my teeth were sharpening into points. It was as if I was merging with the twisted fabric of the house, becoming a part of its distorted reality, a creature of its own making. The metallic scent was now a thick, viscous fluid that was coating my skin, and the humming from the walls was a constant, pulsating vibration that seemed to be reshaping my very being. The voice was still there, urging me on, guiding the transformation, telling me that this was my true form, my true purpose. I tried to resist, to hold on to my humanity, but it was like trying to grasp a handful of sand. The more I tried to hold on, the more it slipped away. The different versions of myself that I had seen in the visions were no longer just distant memories. They were becoming tangible entities, fragments of my fractured consciousness that were beginning to manifest within the house. I would catch glimpses of them in the corners of my eyes, fleeting shadows that looked like me, but were somehow different, distorted versions of my own fragmented self. Sometimes they would appear in the mirrors, their faces contorted in expressions of pain and despair, their eyes filled with a haunting emptiness that mirrored my own. And sometimes they would speak, their voices echoing mine, but distorted, filled with resentment and hatred. "You did this to us," they would say, their accusations echoing in my mind, adding another layer of guilt and self-loathing to my already fragile state. It felt like I was being haunted by my own selves, each one a manifestation of my deepest fears and regrets, each one adding to the chorus of voices that were tearing me apart. I was becoming a battleground for my own fragmented identities, a prisoner in a house filled with the ghosts of my own shattered self. The metallic scent was now a suffocating presence, and the humming from the walls was a constant, relentless torment. The house was no longer just a distorted structure. It was a living, breathing entity actively participating in my torment. The walls pulsed and shifted, the doors opened and closed on their own, and the windows displayed terrifying visions that seemed to be designed specifically to break my spirit. The floors would tilt and sway beneath my feet, making it impossible to find my footing, and the ceiling would lower, crushing me with its oppressive weight. The house seemed to be testing me, probing my fears, and exploiting my vulnerabilities. It was like I was trapped inside a living nightmare, and the house was the orchestrator of my suffering. The shadowy figure was still there, lurking in the darkness, watching my every move, and the whispers were now a chorus of taunts and accusations, echoing through the labyrinthine hallways. The house had become a prison, a torture chamber designed specifically for me, and I was trapped within its walls, with no hope of escape. The metallic scent was now a physical presence, coating everything, and the humming from the walls was a deafening roar that seemed to be tearing my consciousness apart. I was no longer just alone. I was being actively hunted by a living, malevolent entity that had taken the form of my own home. The transformation was almost complete. My body was no longer human. It had become a grotesque amalgamation of bone, flesh, and distorted architecture, a living monument to the twisted reality that had consumed me. My skin was hard and brittle, like dried clay. My limbs were long and spindly, and my face was a grotesque mask of sharp angles and hollowed eyes. The metallic scent was now a part of me, emanating from my very pores, and the humming from the walls had become a constant, internal vibration that resonated through my entire being. The voice was still there, now sounding as if it was coming from within me, guiding my actions, directing my thoughts, merging with my consciousness. I was no longer sure where I ended, and the malevolent force began. Our identities had become intertwined, fused together by the shared experience of the distorted reality. I was becoming something else, something new, something that was neither human nor entirely of the house, a hybrid creature born of fear and despair. The visions were still there, but they were no longer separate from me. They were a part of my own fragmented consciousness, a kaleidoscope of twisted memories and horrifying possibilities that seemed to stretch out to infinity. I was no longer an individual. I was becoming a part of the whole, an extension of the malevolent force that had consumed me. In a moment of strange clarity, amidst the chaos of the transformation, I finally understood. The malevolent force that had been tormenting me wasn't an external entity. It was me. Or rather, it was a part of me, a repressed fragment of my own consciousness that had been twisted and corrupted by some unknown trauma, some forgotten event in my past. The shadowy figure, the whispers, the distorted reality. They were all manifestations of my own inner darkness, a reflection of the broken self that I had been trying so desperately to deny. The house itself was a metaphor for my own mind, a labyrinth of distorted memories and repressed emotions, a prison built from my own fears and insecurities. The metallic scent was the smell of my own decay. The humming from the walls was the sound of my own fractured thoughts, and the visions were fragments of my own buried past. I had been my own tormentor all along, trapped in a cycle of self-inflicted suffering, and the voice, the all-knowing, manipulative presence, was nothing more than the manifestation of my own self-loathing and despair. The realization was crushing, a bleak and horrifying truth that finally stripped away the last vestiges of hope. I was trapped in a nightmare of my own making, and there was no escape, no redemption. There was nothing left of me, nothing of the person I once was. I was now a part of the house, a grotesque extension of its twisted architecture, a living embodiment of my own inner darkness. The transformation was complete, and the cycle of torment was now a permanent part of my existence. There was no escape, no redemption, only the endless repetition of the same horrifying events, the same distorted memories, the same self-inflicted suffering. The voices were still there, but they were no longer taunts and accusations. They were the sound of my own thoughts, echoing through the labyrinthine corridors of my mind. The metallic scent was now my own essence, and the humming from the walls was the beat of my own shattered heart. The house was now my body, and I was a prisoner within its walls, trapped forever in a nightmare of my own making. The cycle would begin anew, and I would play my role in the unending torment, as it was all I was now capable of. The bleak truth was that I was both the victim and the executioner, trapped in an eternal loop of self-destruction, with no hope of release.